Hey, what's up guys? In this video we are going to be going over Poli, which is one of those analog-y instruments. This is a Max for Live instruments introduced in the Creative Essentials pack. How you get it is you just go into packs and go to your available packs and it'll be in there, and you hit download and then install, and then there it is. It just kind of appears in there. Pretty cool. And yeah, it's actually pretty useful. It has a nice sound, and it's kind of the old way of going about things. So there's no like oscillator selection. They're all kind of free running at the same time. Not free running. They're running at the same time. They're, the pitch tracked, dictated by what key you're pressing, but they're always there. There's just a mixer that you kind of engage and things like that. So let's go through these one by one. So you got a couple sections. Oh, actually, before we start that, still getting used to this, I'm going to hit Shift question mark, and that'll give me help when I hover over things so I can better explain. And I recommend hitting the question mark, Shift question mark, and having this open while you're figuring things out. It's actually pretty neat. So we have our first section here, and this would be, I guess, the oscillator section. This generates the sound, and I say this a lot, but how you program synths since the beginning of time is you program them left to right, right? So you pick your oscillator, you shape it with filters and stuff, you modulate, and then you have your volume, which is, a bunch of other things, but I'm going to get there in a second. So first part is the oscillator generation. That in turn goes to this section, which is, I guess we'll call it the filter. And actually, yeah, let's split this up into two sections. The LFO, singular LFO, which is basically another oscillator, but you can map it to things, a low frequency oscillator that's not pitch tracked. And down here is the filter. So high pass filter, low pass filter, etc., etc. And over here we have our modulation, which the LFO filter envelope or amp envelope can modulate any of these things. I'll show you how that's done. And then the final stage is chorus and volume, voice options, pitch bend range, and the overall amplitude ADSR at the end here. And yeah, so let's start with the first section. Let's get rid of some stuff. So in Poli, which is short for polyphonic, you have basically a saw. Right? Pretty neat saw, analog sounding saw. And if we turn the volume down for the saw, we get basically nothing, which makes sense. So you have your saw, your pulse, which is a square, and you can dictate the width of the square. So you can get some 80s sounds adjusting the pulse width. And something really cool about this instrument is it has an oscilloscope. So you can actually see what's going on. So I'd recommend this for learning. So moving on, we have a sub, which is either a sine or a saw that is an octave below. And you can change this, but I'll get into that in a second. A sub is essentially something that'll go underneath to add a bit more bite. Right, and we can change that to sine as well. Right, makes sense. And then we have noise. And noise is pretty cool. Noise adds, some flavor to the sound. It makes it sound a bit more analog. Noise is pretty useful, and we can adjust the color. Now, color is basically, it ranges, it says right here, from pink noise to white noise, and it's a high-pass filter. So you can adjust what, like, the weightness of the white noise is, and that makes sense. So let's just listen to it by itself. right? So all synths kind of have this. You can adjust the kind of overall sound of the white noise. So you can adjust that to taste. And that's basically it. Saw, pulse, square, sub, and noise. Something else that I want to show you is the X mod, which you can modulate the saw, or it's more of a ramp saw, with the pulse. So that's like on 0, but we can modulate it. And that's you can get some really interesting effects that way. Maybe a bit more like punch if you modulate it, things like that. And yeah, it sounds analog-y, basically. So you can kind of treat this pulse wave as I guess another LFO that's pitch tracked, which is quite useful. So a cool thing in Ableton Live 10 is you can actually double click now to reset things, which I find to be pretty cool. So from here, I think, yeah, I explained all that. So from here, we have our ring and our frequency. So think of this as another LFO. And to best illustrate, I'm going to set my sub wave to sine. Bring that up. Right, so I have a sine wave, which is kind of pure and neat sounding. Or not. You can see what's going on easier with the sine wave. And what ring is ring is essentially volume modulation that goes really fast. And when you modulate the volume, like really, really, really fast, you actually get a tone that's really interesting. And it's, yeah, pretty neat. So we can adjust our ring amount just to exaggerate and increase the frequency. So you can go all the way up to 3 kilohertz, which is in the audible range. And do all sorts of cool things with that. The ring modulator source, or I guess you call it the LFO shape, is a saw wave. We can change that to sine, and this is where we can better kind of see what's going on. So what that's doing is adding harmonics to that sub-oscillator. And that sounds pretty cool in my opinion. And these are, these were a staple in synths back in the day. Just, a hardwired LFO to amplitude. And yeah, basically you can do this in any kind of modern digital synth, same thing. But yeah, it just adds to that sound. So let's set things to there. Feel free to kind of pause the video and follow along. So you have this little option down here, I guess LCD tabs, I guess you call it that. This is basically adjusting the pitch of the saw, pulse, and sub. Noise doesn't have a pitch, so that's okay. But yeah, so you can confirm that the sub-oscillator is -1, not decibels, octave, sorry, I'm a little rusty. You can go to -2, or you can have it at 0, so it's kind of like, I guess, another saw wave, which would be kind of cool. And we can increase this other saw wave. We have 2 saw waves going on. They're not locked in phase. But yeah, we can just do some cool stuff by adjusting the fine tuning. So the CT is fine tuning, and the ST is semitone tuning. So I adjusted that up 34 CT, so 34 semitones, and now I have like this cool kind of beating analog-y chorusy effect, which sounds very analog-y. And I could do other stuff too, like bring this up like a 7th. Right, and go to town with that. And I'm playing in monophonic mode. This is actually a synth that can play in polyphony. So if I play a chord, right, and there's that, which sounds pretty cool. And yeah, with the pulse, I can add a little bit. then maybe bring that up 12. And there's just another layer of a square wave in there, which is pretty neat. All right, so let's reset those back. Double click to reset. So right now, I have a very interesting saw wave. So that's fine. All right, so let's move on to the next section, and that is the, I guess, another oscillator. So there's a couple of ways to go about it. We have the shape. Sine, up means saw wave ramp up. Down, triangle, rectangle, sample and hold. Bin, which is bit quantize, and then random. So a lot of cool things to use. I'm going to get back to that when we get into the modulation section. These are kind of linked. And I'm going to get into the filter section. So hardwired high-pass filter and low-pass filter with resonance only on the low-pass filter, I believe. Oh, they're on both. Okay, so we got high-pass filter, which will cut out the low end, and then the low-pass filter, which cuts off the high end. You see that drastically alters the shape. You shape your sound with filters, which is pretty cool. So a really cool thing about this is you can, let's have the sub here, and let's have that an octave down. And they are out of sync, which is fine. That's what we want. And we can have it so the sub goes into the filter or it does not. So the sub oscillator will completely bypass this filter. We can just shape the saw and pulse independently. The noise has its own filter, I believe. And yeah, you're off to the races. Below the high-pass filter, low-pass filter, and resonance is the filter ADSR, A attack, D S R. And this is basically kind of, I guess, hardwired into it, and by default in the modulation it's set to 50%, which is pretty cool. So we just bring down the sustain. Right, so that filter is starting out open and then closing. And I apologize, my webcam in the lower right is acting up. Thank you, Windows. So boost the resonance so it's a bit analogy, and we can also do a cool thing, which is in the modular world, that we can actually loop the ADSR. So when it kind of fully releases, it'll just restart. So your common kind of technique, you can re-trigger the ADSR and use it as another envelope, or not another, sorry, another LFO. So pretty flexible. And there is that. So all right, so there's that section. So the modulation section. So there are 3 modulation sources. The LFO. Right, the LFO is, oh, let me get my proper pencil here. The LFO is right here. The filter envelope is right here. This guy. And the amplifier envelope is down here. So these are your modulation sources. Right, I'll just circle them all. So you got 3 modulation sources, which seems kind of limited, but this is basically what you had to work with back in the day. And you can do a lot with this sort of thing. So delete that, go back to that. So yeah, we can modulate low-pass filter, high-pass filter, volume, pitch, pulse width modulation, and frequency modulation, the rate of that. And we can also modulate the LFO with the filter envelope, which is pretty neat. So let's just get a square wave going. So I'll double click, so it's at 50%, so 50-50 duty cycle, half on, positive, and then negative, like so. I can use the LFO, I'll double click on the LFO, to modulate the pulse width modulation, this guy right here. Right, so now I am modulating this pulse width modulation with this LFO, so I can do some cool stuff like the rate, increase that. It's doing something interesting. I can set it so it does not re-trigger, so it's kind of free running at all times, which gives us a different sound, which is neat. We can also do a fade in, so it takes a while for that LFO to get to the maximum peak to peak that it's allowed to. Which sounds pretty cool. And we have different shapes we can work with, up, down. And, you know, sample and hold. Which sounds pretty analog-y. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase the saw. I'm going to work with the saw here, and I want the low-pass filter to be on. So low-pass filter, LFO, just bring that all the way up. So a sample and hold is basically random points that are sustained for 8.55 hertz. That's the speed, or something. We can do all sorts of things. So right now it's free running as of a frequency. We can set it to switch to sync. So it'll sync to the project that we have, so it'll get more rhythmic. Right, and just all sorts of things. Rectangle, which sounds neat, or synced sine. And you can do all sorts of stuff with that. So that's all that. We can, you know, modulate the pitch. And the amplitude, which is the loudness, which acts as another amplitude modulation source. We can just get into this all day. Another tab in here in the modulation section is, let me just put that back, is the MIDI. So we have key, which is how high the key we're pressing, so the pitch of the key, how hard we hit the key, and then aftertouch. So yeah, a lot of neat things you can do with that. So like aftertouch for the low pass filter. Right? If you have like something that's compatible with aftertouch. Key tracking on the low pass filter is pretty useful because as you go up the keys, you want the filter to kind of open up a bit so those higher frequencies come through, and it just gives you, I guess, more of a, there's continuity in the sound if you're playing like up and down the keyboard and you're just going crazy. And yeah, velocity is, you know, how hard you hit will open things up a bit more or lower them, so you can get really expressive. It's all about, I guess, expression. So yeah, there's that. So we have an analog-y section up here, which is the chorus section. So we have no chorus, A chorus. A chorus is subtle, B is less subtle, C is pretty exaggerated. Get some exaggerated stuff going on there. And we can randomize the pan. So it's bouncing back and forth, and it just makes it, you know, more interesting sounding. And that's the chorus section. and chorus was used quite a bit back in the day. Volume knob, you know, if you have like extreme resonance going on and you have like ring modulation and you're going crazy, you can just bring that down or up depending on what's going on. Down here, the pitch bend, what's this one do? Oh, cool. So pitch bend is the pitch range. So like maximum value of your pitch bend will be at a fifth. If I have that set to 12, which I usually do, it's a full octave. And that makes more sense. We can also have it so it only affects the saw, which is cool. You get some like interesting kind of dissonant sort of things. With the glide, what that does is if you are in mono and you go from one note to another while still holding the previous note, it'll kind of bend up. Right? I'll make it, make it more kind of exaggerated. Right? And that kind of mimics like the pitch tracking. It'll kind of go up and gives it a bit more of a funky forest feel. That's the word of the video, funkish forest feel. We have a monophonic mode, poly, and unison mode. So polyphonic is like more than one note at the same time. Monophonic is one, so just kind of mimics your typical monophonic 80s, 90s, 70s instrument. Unison kind of spreads it. It's written down to 0, stacked, if we do that. Yeah, and that's the voicing. And down here is the ADSR for the amplitude. We can just do some cool stuff. Get some chiptune stuff going on. Or, you know, get some pads. Oh, if we go poly, chorus. And, you know, someone's funeral's going on. Things like that. So that is the basic rundown of Poli, or Poli. It is a Max for Live instrument. So with that being said, if you're savvy, you can click this little button, open it up, and you can do all sorts of fun things with it. Take it apart, repurpose it, maybe add a couple more saw waves, add you know, unison per oscillator. What else? Add another LFO. These are things that you can do, which is pretty interesting. And yeah, that's Poli. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Take care and have a good one.